Listen carefully, because this may shift how you see everything. You thought the narcissist was winning. You thought they got away with the lies, the manipulation, the control. You watched them walk away untouched, unbothered, even elevated, while you were left picking up the pieces. But what if I told you, you were not witnessing their victory? You were witnessing the delay before divine correction. Because there is something you must understand. When God steps into a situation, He does not rush, He reveals. He does not panic, He positions, and He does not miss. So what looks like silence is actually strategy. What feels like injustice is actually alignment. And right now, whether you see it or not, three specific things are already in motion. Things that no narcissist can escape, no matter how powerful they think they are. There is something you must understand about truth. It is not fragile, and it does not need protection. Truth is self-sustaining. It carries within itself the power to rise, to surface, and to reveal. And no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it under layers of deception, manipulation, and carefully constructed lies, it has a way of breaking through at the appointed time. A narcissist builds their entire existence on concealment. They are not just hiding actions, they are hiding intentions, motives, and identities. What you saw was never the full picture. It was a projection, a performance designed to control perception. They rely on confusion to maintain authority. They rely on silence to maintain their image. They rely on your doubt to maintain their position. But here is the reality. Anything built on illusion cannot withstand the pressure of truth forever. When God begins to expose what was hidden, it does not always happen in one dramatic moment. It is often a process, subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. Small inconsistencies begin to appear. Stories stop aligning. Their words start contradicting their actions in ways that others can no longer ignore. The same charm that once convinced people begins to feel rehearsed. The same confidence begins to feel forced. And gradually, the image they worked so hard to maintain begins to crack. Exposure is not just about others seeing who they really are. It is about the collapse of the false identity they created. Because a narcissist invests heavily in perception. They do not just want to be seen. They want to be seen a certain way. Powerful, superior, blameless, in control. And when truth enters the equation, it disrupts that entire structure. You may have tried to explain it. You may have tried to warn others. You may have spoken your truth and felt ignored, dismissed, or even labeled as the problem. But truth does not depend on immediate validation. Just because people did not see it, then does not mean they will not see it later. Truth operates on timing, not opinion. And when that timing arrives, something remarkable happens. People begin to see what you saw. Not because you convinced them, but because the evidence becomes undeniable. The patterns become visible. The behavior becomes consistent. And what was once hidden behind charm is now revealed through repetition. Understand this clearly. Exposure is not an act of revenge. It is an act of alignment. It is reality correcting distortion. It is light entering a space that was once controlled by darkness. And here is where it becomes even more powerful. Exposure does not only affect how others see them, it begins to affect how they see themselves. Because once the illusion starts breaking externally, it creates pressure internally. The mask becomes harder to maintain. The performance becomes exhausting. And the gap between who they pretend to be and who they actually are becomes impossible to ignore. This is why you must never feel discouraged when truth seems delayed. Delay is not denial. What is hidden is not protected. It is simply waiting for the right moment to be revealed. While they were investing energy into maintaining a false image, something greater was at work. Time was collecting evidence. Every action, every contradiction, every inconsistency was being recorded, not for punishment, but for revelation. So when exposure begins, it feels sudden to those who were unaware. But in reality, it is the result of a long process that has finally reached its breaking point. And here is your position in all of this. You are not responsible for exposing them. Your responsibility was to walk in truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Your responsibility was to remain aligned with what is real, even when others could not see it. Because truth does not need your defense, it needs your alignment. And once you understand that, you will stop trying to prove what you experienced. You will stop exhausting yourself explaining what happened. You will stop seeking validation from people who are not yet ready to see. Because you will recognize something deeper. When God decides it is time for truth to surface, no reputation can protect it, no manipulation can hide it, and no illusion can sustain it. What was hidden will be revealed, not by force, but by nature. And when it happens, it will not just expose them, it will free you. There is something deeply misunderstood about power, and until you understand this, you will continue to overestimate the strength of a narcissist. What you perceived as their power was never truly theirs. It was borrowed. It was extracted. It was sustained by external sources, not internal substance. A narcissist does not thrive because they are strong. They thrive because they are connected to a constant stream of attention, validation, and emotional reactions. That is their fuel. Every time someone tries to prove themselves to them, every time someone defends themselves against their accusations, every time someone seeks their approval, they are feeding a system that was designed to keep them elevated artificially. But there comes a moment when God interrupts that system. And when that interruption begins, it does not always look dramatic at first. It is subtle, strategic. One by one, the sources that once fed the narcissist begin to shift. People who once tolerated their behavior begin to withdraw. Individuals who once admired them begin to question. Those who once responded emotionally begin to go silent. And the narcissist who built their identity on constant reinforcement starts to experience something they are not equipped to handle: lack. You must understand this. When the supply is removed, the illusion collapses. Because without external validation, the narcissist is left face to face with the very emptiness they spent their life trying to avoid. They begin to feel restless, agitated, even desperate. Not because something is being done to them, but because something is no longer being given to them. And that absence is powerful. It exposes dependency. This is why you may notice an increase in their efforts when their supply is threatened. They may become more aggressive, more manipulative, more persistent. They may try to provoke reactions to regain control, to pull people back into the cycle. But what you are actually witnessing is not strength, it is withdrawal. It is the behavior of someone who is losing access to what once sustained them. And here is where divine order becomes undeniable. God does not need to destroy the narcissist to dismantle their influence. He simply removes what was never meant to sustain them in the first place. The attention fades, the admiration weakens, the control slips, and suddenly the person who seems so powerful begins to look unstable, inconsistent, and exposed. Not because they changed overnight, but because the environment that supported their illusion is no longer cooperating. This is why your silence matters. This is why your withdrawal matters. Because when you step back, you are not just protecting your peace. You are participating in a process that breaks a cycle. You are no longer contributing to something that was draining you while empowering them. Many people struggle at this stage because they interpret the narcissist's reaction as a sign that they are still powerful. But you must shift your perspective. The louder they become, the weaker they are becoming. The more desperate their actions, the more evident it is that something essential is slipping away from them. True power is stable. It does not beg, chase, or manipulate. So when you see those behaviors intensify, recognize them for what they are: evidence that the source has been disrupted. And as this continues, the narcissist is forced into unfamiliar territory. They can no longer rely on the same tactics with the same effectiveness. The people they once controlled are no longer responding in predictable ways. The strategies that once guaranteed results begin to fail. That is not coincidence. That is a system being shut down. And in that shutdown, something critical happens. The narcissist begins to experience the consequences of operating without a foundation. Because when your identity is built on what others give you, the removal of those people reveals how little was there to begin with. So do not misinterpret what you see during this process. Do not feel intimidated by their attempts to regain control. Stay grounded in truth, because what is happening is not random, it is precise. The same God who allowed you to see clearly is the same God who is cutting off what empowered them. And when the supply is gone, the performance cannot continue. There is a dimension of divine justice that many people misunderstand because they are expecting immediate intervention, instant results, and visible punishment. But that is not how higher order works. When God begins to deal with a narcissist, he often does something far more powerful than instant correction. He allows the full weight of their own actions to unfold over time. This is where consequence becomes unavoidable. A narcissist operates under the illusion that they are in control of outcomes. They believe they can manipulate narratives, distort truth, and orchestrate people in such a way that they remain untouched. But what they fail to understand is that every action they take sets something in motion. Every lie carries a trajectory. Every act of manipulation plants a seed. And those seeds do not disappear. They develop. At first, it may seem like nothing is happening. In fact, it may look like they are advancing. Their confidence grows. Their behavior becomes even more reckless. Why? Because they mistake delay for escape. They assume that because nothing has happened yet, nothing will happen at all. But that assumption is the very trap they fall into. Because consequences are not always immediate, but they are always precise. What begins to happen is subtle at first. The very strategies they use to control others start to create instability in their own lives. The lies they told require more lies to sustain, and eventually they cannot keep up with the weight of their own deception. The relationships they built on manipulation begin to crack because what is not rooted in truth cannot endure pressure. People may not confront them immediately, but they begin to withdraw, to question, to distance themselves. And then something deeper occurs. The environment around them starts responding differently. Opportunities begin to shift. Favor becomes inconsistent. Situations they once controlled no longer respond the same way. It is as if life itself is no longer cooperating with them. This is not coincidence. This is alignment. The system is correcting itself. You must understand, when consequences unfold, they do not come as a single event. They come as a sequence. One thing leads to another. One decision triggers the next outcome. And before long, the narcissist finds themselves in situations they cannot manipulate their way out of. Their words lose credibility. Their influence begins to weaken. Their reputation starts to carry questions instead of authority. And here is the most profound part. They begin to experience what they once inflicted on others. The confusion, the instability, the emotional unrest, they begin to encounter it themselves, not necessarily from the same people, but through the same patterns. Because life has a way of reflecting back what was projected outward. This is not about revenge. It is about reflection. The narcissist is forced into a position where they must face the outcomes they created, but without the control they once had. And because they never developed the capacity for accountability, this becomes overwhelming. They cannot process it correctly. They cannot adjust effectively. Instead, they become more frustrated, more reactive, more exposed. And while all of this is happening, something critical must be clear to you. You are not called to interfere with this process. Many people make the mistake of trying to step in, to prove a point, to seek validation, or to accelerate what they believe should happen. But when you understand divine order, you realize that intervention is unnecessary. The process is already in motion, and it is far more precise than anything human effort could achieve. Your role is not to enforce consequences. Your role is to step out of the cycle. Because the moment you remove yourself, the system begins to work without obstruction. The narcissist no longer has access to you as a source, as a distraction, or as a shield. And without that access, they are left to deal fully with the reality they created. So do not measure justice by speed. Measure it by certainty. Because what God allows to unfold is not random, it is exact. Every action finds its result. Every pattern reaches its conclusion. And every individual, regardless of how powerful they appear, eventually meets the outcome of the life they have constructed. And when that realization settles in, you no longer feel the need to question what is happening. You understand it. You recognize that nothing was overlooked here. Nothing was ignored, and nothing will remain unresolved. Because in a system governed by truth, consequence is not optional, it is inevitable. There comes a moment in every system of life where pride reaches its limit. It rises, it inflates, it convinces a person that they are untouchable, unchallengeable, and above correction. And that is exactly where the shift begins. Because no individual can build an identity on superiority without eventually being confronted by reality. A narcissist survives on the belief that they are always right, always justified, always above others. They construct a world where they are the center and everyone else exists to serve their narrative. But this illusion is fragile. It is not built on truth. It is built on distortion. And anything built on distortion cannot stand indefinitely. So what happens is not random. It is precise. Life begins to introduce situations that the narcissist cannot control. Not small inconveniences, but strategic disruptions. Moments where their usual tactics stop working. The charm that once impressed people begins to lose its effect. The manipulation that once controlled outcomes begins to fail. The authority they once exercised begins to be questioned. And for the first time, they encounter resistance they cannot dominate. This is where the illusion starts to crack. Because their sense of superiority depends on constant reinforcement. They need to feel above others in order to maintain their identity. But when circumstances arise that challenge that position, when they are ignored instead of admired, corrected instead of praised, or exposed instead of believed, it creates internal instability. They are forced into situations where they are no longer the most powerful person in the room. And that is deeply unsettling for someone who has built their entire identity on being in control. But it goes deeper than external circumstances. The real disruption happens internally. The confidence they displayed was never rooted in truth. It was a defense mechanism. It was a shield covering insecurity, fear, and inadequacy. And when life begins to strip away the external validations they relied on, that shield starts to weaken. Now they are left with something they have spent their entire life avoiding, themselves. They begin to experience frustration, confusion, even anger, not because others have changed, but because their methods are no longer producing the same results. The world is no longer responding to them in the way it used to. And without that response, their identity starts to feel unstable. This is not punishment in the way people often think. This is exposure to reality. Because when someone has lived in a self-created illusion for so long, the most powerful correction is not external destruction. It is internal realization. It is the moment when the image they have of themselves no longer matches the reality they are experiencing. And that moment cannot be avoided forever. They may try to compensate. They may attempt to regain control, to find new sources of validation, to rebuild the illusion somewhere else. But the pattern begins to repeat. The same breakdown happens again and again because the foundation has not changed. Pride does not collapse in a single event. It collapses in stages. First, there is subtle resistance. Then there is visible opposition. Then there is undeniable exposure. And finally, there is isolation, where the individual can no longer maintain the illusion because there is no one left willing to participate in it. At that point, they are faced with a decision: confront the truth or continue the cycle. But regardless of what they choose, the illusion of superiority has already been disrupted. And here is what you must understand. This process is not about humiliating them. It is about restoring truth, because no one can operate above reality forever. There is always a point where life demands alignment. So when you see a narcissist being challenged, questioned, or even diminished in ways you never thought possible, do not misinterpret it. You are not witnessing random misfortune. You are witnessing the systematic dismantling of an illusion. Because anything that exalts itself above truth will eventually be brought back down, not by force, but by reality itself. And once that process begins, it does not stop until the illusion is no longer sustainable. There is a moment in every toxic connection when separation feels like loss, but in reality, it is one of the highest forms of protection you will ever experience. When God begins to separate a narcissist from their victims, it is not sluchainus, it is strategy. It is not rejection, it is redirection. Because as long as access exists, damage continues. And God in His wisdom understands that you cannot heal in the same environment that is breaking you. A narcissist survives through proximity. They need to be close enough to influence your thoughts, distort your perception, and gradually weaken your sense of self. That is why separation becomes necessary. Not optional, necessary. Because you cannot clearly see something that you are constantly surrounded by. Distance brings clarity. Silence reveals truth. And absence exposes what presence was hiding. Many people resist this stage. They question it. They fight it. They even try to reconnect with the very person they were delivered from. Why? Because emotional attachment does not immediately disappear when divine separation begins. Your mind may understand what is happening, but your emotions are still catching up. And in that gap, confusion can make you believe you are losing something valuable. But you must shift your understanding. You are not losing access. You are losing interference. Because every time you tried to grow, they interrupted it. Every time you tried to think clearly, they distorted it. Every time you tried to stand strong, they weakened it. So, God does something powerful. He creates distance that the narcissist cannot easily cross. Sometimes it looks like a sudden breakup. Sometimes it looks like conflicts that push you apart. Sometimes it is a change in environment, a shift in relationships, or even an internal awakening where you can no longer tolerate what you once accepted. However it happens, the result is the same: separation. And here is what makes this so profound. The narcissist often does not understand why they are losing access. They may try to return. They may attempt to reestablish control. They may even present themselves as changed or remorseful. But when God has initiated separation, what once worked will no longer work. The same words will not affect you the same way. The same tactics will not produce the same results because something inside you has shifted. This is where your responsibility becomes critical. Separation is given, but maintenance is your choice. You must guard the distance that was created for your protection. Because if you reopen doors that God has closed, you reintroduce the very disruption you were delivered from. Understand this clearly. Not everyone who had access to you is meant to continue having it. Access is a privilege, not a right. And when someone consistently uses that access to harm, manipulate, or control, they disqualify themselves from that privilege. God does not remove people randomly. He removes them intentionally. And when He separates you from a narcissist, He is not just protecting your present, He is preserving your future. Because what you were becoming in that environment was not who you were created to be. You were shrinking when you were meant to expand. You were doubting when you were meant to be confident. You were surviving when you were meant to be thriving. So the separation is not just about them. It is about you. It is about restoring your clarity, rebuilding your identity, and reconnecting you with truth. And once that separation is fully understood, something powerful happens. You stop desiring what was removed. You stop romanticizing what was harmful. You stop questioning what was necessary. Instead, you begin to appreciate the distance because you realize that what felt like an ending was actually the beginning of your freedom. There comes a moment in life when all distractions are removed, when every external voice fades and a person is left alone with nothing but themselves. This is not by accident, it is by design. Because one of the most powerful ways God deals with a narcissist is by forcing them into a place where they can no longer escape who they truly are. A narcissist spends their entire life running, not physically but internally. They run from accountability, from truth, from the deep awareness of their own brokenness. They build identities to avoid reality. They construct personas to hide insecurity. They manipulate others so they never have to confront themselves. But there is a limit to how long a person can live disconnected from truth before truth begins to close in on them. And when that moment comes, it is uncomfortable. It is unsettling. It is unavoidable. Because now the very things they used to escape, people, attention, control, are no longer available in the same way. The noise quiets down. The distractions weaken. The crowd that once fed their ego is no longer as present, no longer as responsive, no longer as easily controlled. And in that silence, something begins to happen. They start hearing themselves. Not the version they projected, not the image they sold to others, but the real voice within, the one they have suppressed for years. And that voice does not flatter them. It confronts them. It reminds them of every inconsistency, every manipulation, every moment they chose deception over truth. It brings awareness to what they tried to bury. This is what makes it so difficult, because it is one thing to deceive others. It is another thing to face yourself without any many filters. And here is the principle. When God removes your ability to escape, He is not trying to destroy you. He is exposing you to you. But for the narcissist, this exposure feels like pressure because they have not developed the internal capacity to handle truth. They have trained themselves to deflect, to deny, to project. So when self-confrontation becomes unavoidable, it creates internal conflict. They may feel restless without understanding why. They may become more agitated, more frustrated, even more desperate to regain control. Because something inside them knows they are losing the ability to avoid reality. And yet this moment carries an opportunity. Because being forced to face yourself is the beginning of transformation if a person chooses it. The challenge is that many narcissists resist this process. Instead of accepting what is being revealed, they try to rebuild the illusion. They seek new distractions, new people, new environments where they can recreate the same patterns. But even then, something has shifted. Because once truth has been revealed internally, it cannot be completely ignored. It lingers, it presses, it waits. That is why you may see them become more unstable over time. Not because life is against them, but because they are resisting what they are being shown about themselves. Now understand this clearly. This process is not about you. You are not responsible for their realization. You are not required to participate in their self-confrontation. In fact, your role is to remain separate from it. Because while they are being forced inward, you are being called upward. You are being developed in awareness, in clarity, in strength. You are learning to recognize truth without needing validation from someone else. You are growing beyond the need to fix, to rescue, or to understand someone who refuses to understand themselves. And this is where your power returns. Because once you realize that God is dealing with them at a level you cannot reach, you stop interfering. You stop questioning why things are unfolding the way they are. You stop feeling responsible for outcomes that were never yours to control. You begin to trust the process. And in that trust, there is freedom. Freedom from confusion. Freedom from emotional entanglement. Freedom from the illusion that you were ever meant to carry what they refuse to face. So when you see them struggling internally, when you sense that something is shifting within them, do not be tempted to step back in. Do not interrupt a process that was never yours to manage. Because sometimes the greatest act of wisdom is not intervention, it is separation. And when a narcissist is finally left alone with themselves, without distraction, without control, without escape, they are standing in the one place they try to avoid their entire lives, the place where truth lives. And in that place, one of two things will happen. They will either begin to change or they will continue to resist. But either way, the process has already begun and it cannot be undone.